Brain-Seal syndrome is a mental illness characterized by an obsession with drinking one's own blood and the blood of other humans and animals. As of 2010, over 50,000 people have appeared in psychiatric literature who are said to be obsessed with drinking blood. While the majority of those with the condition are seemingly able to control their desires or have sought adequate treatment, several serial killers have utilized blood drinking in their modus operandi, including the notorious Peter Curtin and Richard Chase. Into these legends and the truth behind them comes Lilly Lindeström. Some people believe that this case is one that shows that real vampires are still at work in Europe. On 4th of May 1932, Minnie Jensen became concerned for the well-being of her friend, Lilly. Both women were prostitutes in the Atlas area of Stockholm, and Minnie hasn't seen or heard from Lilly for 3 days, despite many call attempts and frantic knocks on her door. Known as the call girl, a pun on her lifestyle and the fact that she was the only telephone owner in the building, Lilly was born in Malmö on August of 29, 1900. She had married young and divorced almost as quickly, moving to Stockholm at just the age of 22. Forced into prostitution, Lilly had been escorting since April of 1931. She did well for herself, avoiding the streets and instead utilized her telephone to make bookings out of the perceived safety of her flat. She was known to police, yet remained a popular figure with those who knew her. She had enough money to buy then luxury items such as radios and even managed to purchase clothes on credit at local stores. Lilly's life seemed stable and even prosperous, considering the time she lived in. Her circumstances allowed a certain amount of leisure time, and both Lilly and Minnie had discussed their evening plans to attend celebrations at an island, which the name I can't pronounce, so I'm not gonna even try. This island forms part of Royal National Park. Their conversation, however, was interrupted when Lilly received a strange call on this same phone. Minnie would later describe the voice as sounding well-behaved and like a nice sober gentleman. It was April 30th, known in Sweden as Walpurgis Night. Minnie had left the building to fetch some milk, and after returning around 7 p.m, she found Lilly entertaining the client in her cramped apartment. She came down to Minnie twice to inquire about condoms and confirmed that it was the same man as the one on the telephone. That was the last time Minnie had heard from her friend. At precisely 9 p.m, Minnie knocked on her door asking if she wished to visit the bonfire at the island as planned. There was no answer. Minnie assumed that Lilly had left with a client and headed out but couldn't spot her friend anywhere at the bonfire. Returning home, Minnie tried her door again. Still no answer. After a male friend also failed to get in touch, the duo went to Ruth Johnson, who alongside with her husband were landlords of the building. Together, they went to visit Emma, another friend of Lilly's. Emma, likewise, hadn't seen Lilly since Walpurgis Night and noted that Lilly had failed to meet with her as planned on the 2nd of May. Given the ever-present threat from dangerous clients, they decided to contact the police on the 4th. Officer Nordstrom of the Stockholm police was the first on the scene, and after failing to get an answer at the door, he called the fire department to force an entry. Lilly had been murdered, lying face down on an ottoman. Her clothes were folded neatly on a chair next to a naked corpse. 3 sofa cushions were stacked on top of the body. The apartment was tidy and clean. She had suffered severe trauma to the head from 3 massive blows and had already been dead for 2 to 3 days by the time the body was discovered. The police district doctor, Dr. Turnell, believed the murder weapon was a crowbar, pipe, or other similar heavy metal object, and that Lilly had been attacked from behind, likely killing her instantly. She may have been assaulted while engaged in a sexual act. A blood-soaked tea towel was found in the kitchen, and friends noted that nothing was missing from the apartment. The killer brought the weapon with him and took it as he left, showing evident premeditation. Detectives initially believed it was a clear case of another prostitute murdered by her client. However, they were intrigued by the amount of saliva on Lilly's neck and body. Not to mention the fact that Lilly had been allegedly somehow been drained of blood. There was only a little amount of blood at the scene, with none on the walls, furnishings, or floor, and no noticeable puncture wounds to the body. Despite legends, a gravy ladle used to drink her blood was not found at the scene. A condom was also found protruding from Lilly's anus, with 3 other wrappers found in the bin. The killer had taken the rest of the pack that Minnie had given her friend. Police worked through a series of business cards from men in her apartment, with little expectation of a result, given how thorough the killer had been in the crime scene. All regular clients were ruled out, with no leads forthcoming. There were no witnesses to anyone being seen at the apartment after the believed time of death, and nobody heard a struggle. Lilly's landlady saw 5 men coming and going prior to this, and the fact that Lilly returned to a friend for a second condom leads to the speculation that the killer was in fact not the gentleman that Minnie had heard on the phone. A suspect who may have been the killer was spotted at Norma's Cafe in St. Eric's Plaza. A waitress noticed that a man who came in at 9 p.m. brought a porcelain container with him that she knew belonged to Lilly. The man ordered 2 steak dinners and left. Interestingly, the morning after the murder, the apartment next door was burgled. A woman was woken at 5 a.m. by a young man attempting to access a locked storage closet. The woman screamed, with the man quickly trying to muffle her. She managed to escape and ran down the stairs, crying out for the police. By the time the nearby patrol officer had reached the apartment, the man was gone. He was described as wearing a suit, but with no hat and coat, leading to some speculation he was someone from within the building. Police dismissed the incident as coincidence, noting that no robbery was suspected in the case of Lilly. 6 weeks after the killing, a stained ladle was found outside the apartment building, with many people believing that the stains were blood. However, this ladle was too light to be the murder weapon. A subsequent story in the newspaper claimed that this ladle had been utilized to drink the blood of Lilly. With the little amount of blood at the scene, none on the walls, furnishing or floor, led police to believe that the killer had drunk her blood using this ladle and carried the rest of her blood away. The local press was in an uproar, dubbing the killer as the Atlas Vampire. Desperate, the police arrested a pimp, Peterson, after his own wives raised suspicion. He was allegedly seen being covered in blood by his wife. The police held Peterson for 10 days. They released him after his alibi checked out with his business partner. Police then later turned their suspicions to Ragnar Nilsson, a man who Lilly had an affair with. But he was also cleared. There was virtually no clues to go on. Nothing was stolen from the apartment and the killer left nothing behind. While there were fingerprints, there were many sets and were impossible to identify. Lilly's address book turned up nothing, and what other evidences existed were useless, with DNA evidence on the saliva and condom decades away from being possibly utilized as a clue. Police were hopeful that the killer may have an attack of conscience and come forward, but also feared that this was unlikely to have been the murderer's first killing, nor his last. The days turned into weeks, and soon months and years. The Atlas Vampire never struck again. In the decades since the brutal killings, many theories have emerged surrounding what may have happened in that tiny Stockholm room. Many believe that if the claims of examinations are correct, only a few men would have the knowledge to make such an effective and clean evacuation of blood. Given that almost all of Lilly's blood had been apparently expelled, the killer would have needed to be both bold in carrying it through the streets and equally in need of a place to store it. The risk of clotting would require speed, suggesting that perhaps a culprit within the same building. With no puncture wounds on the body, however, there is a significant doubt as to the veracity of the claim. Another theory that was popularized was that the killer may have been a police officer or somehow otherwise involved in police work, with the murder weapon being a police baton. The scene was effectively scrubbed of clues long before the police became busy. While there were DNA evidences, nobody believed that it would be of any use at the time. With little evidence ever being found in the case and the Atlas Vampire having seemingly never struck again, there's little hope of ever finding out the truth behind the killing of Lilly. While there may have been some truth somewhere in the body being drained of blood, the retellings of Lilly's murder have often lost sight of the story at the core. They focus on the myths of vampirism rather than the tragedy of Lilly herself. While not the answer many seek, the sad truth is sensationalism sells just as well today as it did in 1932. Lilly's body was returned to Malmö and buried in the eastern cemetery of the city. She never received justice and deserved more than being a damsel in yet another 1930s vampire story.